The Resident Evil franchise is known for a lot of things. Its characters, setting, monsters, penchant for remakes, and of course, its gameplay. Since the franchise's birth in 1996, that gameplay has seen a lot of changes. Mostly the gradual shift from slow and shambling horror-focused puzzle solving to eventual run-and-gun chaos that offers little to no scares at all. And then it went back again and might repeat the whole process over. We'll have to see once the Resident Evil 4 remake is out. But speaking of Resident Evil 4, considered not only one of the best games in the series, but one of the best games of all time, one of its most popular mechanics is its inventory management, the attache case. It wasn't a normal menu with 6 to 8 slots like all other past Resident Evil inventory screens. It was a grid where you could move around and rotate all the contents so you could fit everything together like a sort of modified game of Tetris. It was extremely different from how past games did it, but it was a change that was met with widespread praise, because it turned item management into an activity you could partake in as opposed to a passive limitation looming over the player from beginning to end. It provided a new layer of involvement that the previous titles hadn't yet achieved, a layer that players didn't even know they wanted until they got it. Playing around inside the attache case was a game in itself, and it never made a return until 16 years later with Resident Evil Village. As strange as it sounds, people were itching for more attache case action, even going so far as to say that a puzzle game should be made around it. But that's ridiculous, right? You can't simply rip out Resident Evil 4's attache case system and just turn it into its own isolated puzzle experience. Or can you? Enter Save Room by Fractal Projects, the bite-sized puzzle game that is ever so clearly inspired not only by that beloved item management mechanic, but by the Resident Evil franchise at large. For all intents and purposes, Save Room isn't a particularly ambitious game. It has no story to speak of, nor narration of any kind. The menus are extremely simple and settings are bare bones, all clearly made with probably the easiest accessible assets the developers could get. But Save Room doesn't shine in regard to the obvious stuff like this. It shines in the details, particularly the reverence it has for the series it's inspired by. The game's music, which seems to be just one track, will be instantly recognized by anyone who's played through a couple of Resident Evil games because it sounds like a legally distinct mishmash of several games' Save Room themes, especially 4's. Even when you hit the start button on the main menu to dive into the puzzles, you hear the trademark grungy voiceover reciting the game's title,
Save Room,
just like early Resident Evil games. When you actually reach the puzzle screen, all pretense is totally thrown out the window. The game bears its inspiration loud and proud by having a UI that mimics RE4's as closely as possible. There are metal shutters that serve as transitions between levels, there's a health meter in the top left corner, and the icons representing all the necessary puzzle pieces are as identical as possible to the style of Resident Evil 4 without crossing the line into straight-up asset ripping. The dedication on display here is truly remarkable. But the impressive implementation of Resident Evil Easter eggs doesn't end at visual or audio similarities. The best part is the Resident Evil mechanics designed into the very core of Save Room. So before we finally dive into the attache case action, let me give a bit of a warning, and it's going to sound like a weird one. A spoiler warning. I know some of you are probably thinking, wait a second, you just said that there's no story to speak of, so how can you give a spoiler warning? Well, that's the funny thing. Resident Evil is so deeply ingrained into Save Room's gameplay that by going into detail about it, I'll be giving away potentially unexpected mechanics that lead directly to the solutions of many different levels. Mechanics that are probably intended to be pleasant surprises for Resident Evil fans. I know a lot of you probably don't consider this to be worthy of a spoiler warning, but I am technically handing you the answers to a lot of levels. So I'm going to give a warning anyway. So, now you know. Turn away from the rest of this video if you don't want solutions practically handed to you, and that's pretty much all. For everyone else, let's continue. Save Room is actually really smart about how it gradually introduces more and more mechanics as the player makes progress. Things start off simply with just a couple guns, some eggs, boxes of ammunition, soon some grenades, all standard stuff. But before long, more rules are added. First is reloading. Eventually, in order to make space, you need to reload weapons with the ammunition boxes, which removes them from the level entirely. This in itself is a mechanic seen in Resident Evil item management, especially in early games, because it's a safer alternative to reload manually in the inventory screen than to stand around and watch the reload animation in the middle of a fight, where you're vulnerable. Soon after that, item stacking is brought in, another Resident Evil mechanic, where space is cleared up by combining two separate half-full stacks of ammunition to create one full stack. And it still doesn't stop there. The health meter in the upper left corner of the screen isn't just for show. Soon, you begin levels where you start with red health, which, in a lot of games, obviously means you are very close to death. And what item is available in the puzzle itself? That's right, one of the franchise's staple healing items, the first aid spray. And how do you make extra space with it? By using it to heal yourself. And it still doesn't stop there. Eventually, you get fish, another reference to Resident Evil 4 where it's possible at multiple points in the story to shoot and keep fish to use as health items. Of course, you use those here too in Save Room to make space. Then the famous green herbs finally make their appearance, offering yet another method of healing yourself to make space. But any Resident Evil fan knows the true purpose of the herbs: mixing them. Red and yellow herbs soon follow, and now you're making mixtures to save space, then using that mixture to heal yourself and make more available space. And not long after that, another mechanic is added: poison items. You'll get to a level where you can't use a healing spray, herb, or egg to heal yourself and make space because you're already at full health. Then what? Well, that's because you have to purposely damage yourself first by eating rotten eggs and rotten fish, then healing yourself after the fact. And the game goes all the way with this mechanic by adding a layer of complexity to later levels where you have to damage and then heal yourself repeatedly in a specific pattern to clear up the correct amount of space to finish the level. And if you mess that pattern up, you have to start the level again. And eventually the final curveball is thrown: gunpowder. By mixing red, blue, and green gunpowder in different ways, you can make pistol, shotgun, machine pistol, rifle, and magnum ammunition, which clears up space by using up the gunpowder and by potentially using the resulting ammo to reload one of the weapons. This is, obviously, another Resident Evil mechanic, but one that was actually absent from Resident Evil 4. Much like poison and healing items, it's possible to screw yourself over by mixing the wrong type of ammo, forcing you to start the level again. It probably goes without saying, but Save Room is truly inventive in the way it showers Resident Evil fans with little bits of mechanical concepts that only we would know. Because of this, it elevates the puzzle experience to more than just a series of references for the sake of references. It's a clever little head-scratcher that Resident Evil fans are simply able to find an extra amount of enjoyment in, but everyone else is still able to take a crack at it and find themselves hooked, regardless of their knowledge of the series. If there's any negative here to speak of, I guess it would be the length. Save Room features a grand total of 40 levels, which might sound like a decent amount, but depending on both your knowledge of Resident Evil mechanics and your general competency with puzzle games, you can finish this game pretty quickly. It took me less than 90 minutes to get through all 40 levels for the first time. But if you're not particularly good at puzzle games, then your time investment could be doubled to 3 hours. Regardless, it's also important to point out the fact that the game's regular price on Steam is only $3. And even though I blazed through the game in an hour and a half, I would say that's $3 well spent. I'm very satisfied with the content I received for that price, and if the developers ever decide to go back and add more levels, or perhaps even let people make and upload their own created levels, then the game's value would only rise. Overall, Save Room is a bite-sized piece of puzzle excellence and a full-hearted love letter to the Resident Evil series. It took an inventory management system of a 17-year-old game and turned it into a game in itself, and hit a home run in every which way it could. It didn't waste the opportunity by making a blandly straightforward experience, and instead put the effort in to add as many surprising mechanics as it reasonably could, accomplishing two big goals: making a challenging puzzle game and making Resident Evil fans point at the screen in familiarity. You don't have to be a fan of the long-running franchise to enjoy the game, but if you are, you'll just get more out of it. That's all. This concludes my review of Save Room. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you around.